Ruapekapeka is a pa 14 kilometres southeast of Kawakawa in the Northland region of New Zealand. It is one of the largest and most complex pa in New Zealand that was designed specifically to counter the cannons of the British forces. The earthworks can still be seen. Ruapekapeka was the site of the last battle in the Flagstaff War, between Colonial forces and the Ngāpuhi led by Heke and Ruki Kawiti, which was the first major armed conflict between the colonial government and the Māori. Design of Ruapekapeka pa. This war pa was named Ruapekapeka because the pihareanga, or dugouts with narrow circular entrances at top, which gave access to shelters that protected the warriors from cannon fire. These ruas or caves looked like a calabash buried underground, the narrow end uppermost, and could accommodate 15 to 20 warriors. Ruki Kawiti and his allies, including Mataroria and Motiti, designed Ruapekapeka pa as a further development of what is now called the gunfighter pa design that was used at the Battle of Oarawa. It was constructed during 1845 in a good defensive position, in area of no strategic value, well away from civilians, as a challenge to British rule. Ruapekapeka pa improved on the plan of the pa at Oarawa, the site of a battle in the Flagstaff War. The outer walls of the pa had trenches in front of and behind palisades that were 3 meters high, built using puriri logs. Since the introduction of muskets, the Māori had learned to cover the outside of the palisades with layers of flax leaves, making them effectively bulletproof as the velocity of musket balls was dissipated by the flax leaves. On some of the sides of the pa there were 3 rows of palisades, and on other side there were 2 rows of palisades. There were passages between the front and back trenches, so that warriors could move forward to fire and return to shelter to reload. On the high ground an observation tower was erected. At the rear of the pa a well, some 5 meters deep, was dug into a sandstone formation to provide a water supply during the expected siege of the pa. Battle of Ruapekapeka pa. When the new British governor, Sir George Grey, failed to end the Flagstaff War by negotiation, he assembled a British force in the Bay of Islands to deal with Heke and Ruki Kawiti. In early December 1845, the Colonial forces, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Despard, moved by water towards Ruapekapeka and began a 2-week advance over 20 kilometers to bring artillery up to the pa. Bombardment and an incomplete siege commenced on the 27th of December 1845. Several weeks of siege punctuated by skirmishing followed. The Māori had a deck cannon and a field gun. A marine gunner scored a direct hit on the deck cannon after 3 shots, rendering it useless. In any event, the Māori had limited supplies of gunpowder, so that the possession of these guns did not assist the Māori in the defense of Ruapekapeka. The Māori were armed with Snyder-Enfield double-barrel muzzle-loading muskets, flintlock muskets, as well as some pistols. Several weeks of siege punctuated by skirmishing followed, until early on the morning of Sunday, the 11th of January 1846, a British foraging party noted the defenders were unusually quiet. The small group of British troops pushed over the palisade and entered the pa, finding it almost empty. They were reinforced, while Māori tried to re-enter the pa from the back. After a 4-hour gunfight, the remaining Māori withdrew, abandoning the pa. Lieutenant Colonel Despard claimed the outcome as a brilliant success. The Royal Marines and sailors from HMS Hazard, HMS North Star and HMS Calliope saw action in the battle. The official dispatches on the 17th of January 1846 stated that casualties in the British forces were 3 soldiers killed and 11 wounded, 2 Marines killed and 10 wounded, and 9 seamen killed and 12 wounded. However, other published sources give different casualty figures. Reverend Richard Davis noted in his diary of 14 January 1846 that 12 were killed and 30 wounded. Maori casualties are unknown. Later examination of the pa showed that it had been very well designed and very strongly built. In different circumstances it could have withstood a long and costly siege. Lieutenant Bull Navis, who took part in the siege, commented in his journal, "Pa burned. Ruapekapeka found a most extraordinary place, a model of engineering, with a treble stockade, and huts inside, these also fortified. A large embankment in rear of it, full of underground holes for the men to live in, communications with subterranean passages enfilading the ditch. 2 guns were taken, a small one, and an 18-pounder, the latter dismantled by our fire. It appeared that they were in want of food and water. It was the strongest pa ever built in New Zealand. The reason why the defenders appear to have abandoned but then re-entered the pa is the subject of continuing debate. It was later suggested that most of the Maori had been at church. Knowing that their opponents, the British, were also Christians, they had not expected an attack on a Sunday. Reverend Richard Davis noted in his diary of 14 January 1846, "Yesterday the news came that the pa was taken on Sunday by the sailors, and that 12 Europeans were killed and 30 wounded. The native loss uncertain. It appears the natives did not expect fighting on the Sabbath, and were, the great part of them, out of the pa, smoking and playing." It is also reported that the troops were assembling for service. The Tars, having made a tolerable breach with the cannon on Saturday, took the opportunity of the careless position of the natives, and went into the pa, but did not get possession without much hard fighting, hand to hand. However, later commentators have cast doubt on this explanation of the events of Sunday the 11th of January, as fighting had continued on a Sunday at the Battle of Oarawa in July 1845. Yet other later commentators suggested that Heke deliberately abandoned the pa to lay a trap in the surrounding bush, as this would provide cover and give Heke a considerable advantage. In this scenario, Heke's ambush succeeded only partially, as Kawiti's men, fearing the chief had fallen, returned towards the pa, and the British forces engaged in battle with the Maori rebels immediately behind the pa. Aftermath of the Battle of Ruapekapeka. It was Maori custom that the place of a battle where blood was spilt became tapu, so that the Ngāpuhi left Ruapekapeka pa. After the battle, Kawiti and his warriors, carrying the dead, travelled some 4 miles northwest to Waimeo, the ancestral home of Ngāti. After the Battle of Ruapekapeka, Kawiti expressed their will to continue to fight. However, Kawiti and Heke made it known that they would end the rebellion if the colonial forces would leave the Ngāpuhi land. Tamati Wakanene acted as an intermediary in the negotiations with Governor Gray. At this time, Governor Gray faced new threats of rebellion in the south and would have had logistical difficulties in a lengthy campaign against Heke and Kawiti. Although Governor Gray may have underestimated the difficulties the essentially part-time Maori force would experience in continuing to fight against the colonial forces, Governor Gray accepted Tamati Wakanene's argument that clemency was the best way to ensure peace in the north. Heke and Kawiti were pardoned and no land was confiscated.